Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News with Big Hairy Chewy and bigger, and I guess hairier Pat as well. I'm just talking about the facial hair though. Here, Chewy. Hey man, how you doing?
Oh, I've been better this week. I haven't got COVID, but I have caught a cold, which has been kicking my ass for the last couple of days. So,
Oh, real?
apologies for my dry hacking cough.
That's all right.
It's fun, and I assume sexy.
It is. You are. It's like you should now pick up a guitar and start singing Smelly Cat, and because you will end up being the best singer in the world. There's a bit of a throwback to all the 90s kids who will get that joke. I mean, most people will get the Smelly Cat joke, but they may not quite remember the episode where Phoebe had a very, very sick throat, and that finally gave her a good voice for singing. Yeah, cool, man. I can play along with you. I think my ukulele's here somewhere. We could do a little bit of, we could do a little duet. Make a little love.
I don't think anybody has deserved us doing that to them.
So, welcome to the show. Haere mai. And we have got a bunch of stuff to talk about tonight. A couple of sort of interesting pieces tonight as well. I want to talk a bit about quiet quitting. And if you already know what quiet quitting is, I'd like you to have a bit of a chat about it in the chats there. I see there are already people coming in. G'day, Simon. Hey, Freeso. Hey, Simple. Hey, Ro. Hey, David. Because I think on one level it sounds like pretty sensible, a sensible way to operate. And it's sort of the worker going, this is what I'm prepared to do. Every time, I mean, we've all had those jobs, haven't we, where the boss is like, oh, you got to give 110%. And you're like, well, are you going to pay me 110% of my salary? And they're like, no, you got to give 1,000%. Oh, so you're going to give me 10 times my salary? No. Well, yeah, fair day's work for a fair day's pay. Isn't that what they say? But there's actually something that if you're a parent, I want to play you some video tonight, which I'm not trying to exaggerate here, but could possibly be the best, most helpful video you will see this year when it comes to parenting. It's not a parenting interview, but the information within this video has helped me immensely in my parenting, and is something that I've actually watched and looked at a couple of times with my kids. It's to do with technology and to do with devices. And honestly, I've sort of referenced this a couple of times as we've been doing these broadcasts, but I want to play you something. And I honestly think if you're a parent of a kid between sort of 8 and 16 and devices and phones and that kind of stuff are involved with their lives, I'm not exaggerating when I say this could well be the one of the most useful and helpful videos you will see this year, if not ever, other than ET, because that's always number one.
I'm glad you're not building it up too much. That's
no. And what we'll do is we'll play it in the last 3 minutes of the show to keep everyone hanging on. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? Is that the world of broadcasting?
Absolutely.
Something like that.
Bury the lead.
Other than that, we're going to have a look. There's some questions coming around, and it's sort of still talking a little bit about our conversation with Paula Penfold on Friday night and what's happening with, the anti-vaxxer, anti-movement mandate. Maybe they are anti-movement, anti-vaxxer, anti-mandate groups, and also the Brian Tamaki-led protest, the Vanity Project, he did yesterday at Parliament. And there is a blog site called the BFD, and the BFD is Cam Slater's new. I don't know how new it is actually, but he doesn't do whale oil anymore. I'm not quite sure why that all shut down or how it shut down, but it did. And now his thing's called the BFD, but they put a lot of guest posts on there. And so it's not necessarily to do with Cameron Slater, but that's his site. And there's a guest post on there today that talks a bit about the Paula Penfold interview we did. It's actually it doesn't really say much about us. It's just using the interview to make their own point. But the thing is, it asks questions about what the subject matter of the interview. So I want to answer those questions. And there's another question to go alongside with that as well. And to give you to preempt it a bit, the question to go alongside it, they're asking is, how can Paula Penfold make a documentary about, Gardasil and HPV vaccines and speak of them negatively, and then make this documentary and sort of not speak of these vaccines negatively? I mean, isn't that hypocritical? That's kind of the question going around amongst some at the moment, and we will answer that question as well. I can tell you the answer right now is no, but we'll explain why the answer is no.
Almost like they're two completely different things.
maybe with two completely different sets of facts. It's a bit like that, but
who really knows? Who can tell?
Who can tell? Jeez, you got a sexy voice.
I can only hold one thought in my head at a time.
Hey,
not two.
Hey, look, just before we go on, and we did this last Wednesday with you because we'd had an interesting couple of days conversations. I'm sure you've been thinking about the Brian Tamaki Vanity Project in Wellington yesterday. Before we get going, because me and George were on yesterday and you weren't here, do you want to offer anything to the whānau about that? You got any thoughts you want to share on that, or should we just rip into Gaurav Sharma today?
You are, of course, referring to Brian Tamaki's Million Man March, which happened yesterday.
Yeah. His Vanity Project.
Huge numbers. Yeah. He was only 990,000 short
something like
of that stated number.
990,900. Is that right? Anyway.
Yeah, he was a bit short. He was a bit short. And I did see some comments online that because some Air New Zealand and Jetstar flights have been cancelled, and because there were a few ferry sailings cancelled, that was sign of conspiracy to stop people from the South Island attending.
Yeah.
I did see the convoy come through Dunedin. It was about 15 cars. So yeah, it just shows how fractured that group is. He thought he could have anti-mandate protest 2.0. And I think even within that group that are like, yeah, we're real anti-government, we're really motivated to change the regime, they are still looking at Destiny and going, but we'll do it without you because you're weird and we don't like you.
Only because I was on the BFD today. I know we've already talked about it, but I noticed this on the BFD as well. This is actually a statement from Voices for Freedom, basically saying that they were aware of Brian Tamaki's thing. And the People's Court, and they said, in keeping with our decision to share with you last month regarding the Freedom Rights Coalition marches, VFF will not be involved in those events. Given the nature of what is planned, we trust you understand it would be inappropriate to use VFF signs. So no VFF signs are authorized to be used. So yeah, I wasn't planning on talking about this tonight, but just because I was on this site earlier looking to queue up, I noticed that one as well. So yeah, fractured might be the correct thing, but also we talked Chewy last night, and you're welcome to comment on this before we move on, because we had our chat about it last night. Is that this idea of Brian Tamaki pulling together some people is going to do nothing but help re-elect a left-wing government, because if he can pull away 1, 2, 3% of voters that would have been voting for ACT or the Conservatives or National, then that 1, 2 or 3% in what could be a wafer thin election result might be enough to get the Greens and Labour across the ground. So I'd say go for it, Brian.
I mean, he's pitching at an absolutely useless section of potential voters. They're either the guys that are going to vote for the really fringe groups like the Outdoors Party or New Conservatives had a tissue thin covering of legitimacy at one point. I think that's well gone now.
What were they using those tissues for?
Yeah, exactly. Well, for harassment, probably.
Okay.
Or they're pitching at people that don't agree with the process and don't participate in it anyway. So, yeah, it's this is a man that said 20 years ago that he would have been ruling New Zealand by 10 years ago. So, I mean, at some point, someone's gone, hang on, mate, it's not happening.
Yeah. Anyhow, so these conversations will go on. But yeah, I say to all those small fractured parties on the right, because they are all on the right, go for it. Go. If you're just joining us and you don't know who we are unashamedly and unapologetically placed on the left in politics ourselves. However, so it's clear, we do consider ourselves having the ability to walk and chew gum at the same time, which means if the right requires praise, we will praise them, and if the left requires correction, we will correct them, or criticism. So just because we're there, and look, and it's been quite funny after our Paula Penfold conversation, a bunch of people saying, so balanced journalism doesn't exist here, and my response has been two things. One is, when have we ever promised to be balanced? And two, we're not journalists. It's like, When did anyone ever promise balance? In fact, I think that's one of the things we're actively saying, and we scream it from the rooftops. We have a political bias.
Yeah.
Our world, our life experience, our opinions are based on our political bias. However, we are also fair, and in fact, we're not talking about that platform group tonight, but I think actually what we do here is actually what they pretend to do when it comes to balance and free speech and that kind of stuff, up to and including, there's an open invitation for Chantel Baker to come on this show, to which she first responded she wanted to, and the last couple of contacts I've made, she hasn't come back to me. So we will have these conversations. No, it's weird that. Isn't it strange?
Really?
Yeah, it's strange that, eh? Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it's been a busy day of walking around Wellington streets yesterday and kind of getting no exposure whatsoever and not seeing your numbers go up at all. So I can understand you're a bit busy. All right, let's not get snarky about things. It's more tongue in cheek, just so you know. Before we get into it, you've been watching, and I already see you talking in the chat series. Anything we want to throw up before we kick off?
Jack
Johnson. Love that Jack Johnson song. Upside down. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, that was strange, but I'm here for it. No comments yet, but there is one for later when we're talking about this whole quiet quitting thing.
Cool. All right. So let's just start with it. I mean, Gaurav Sharma is still in the news today, obviously, and there's just a bit of a start with a little update from today, because I think what's happened today, there was a new speaker elected because Mallard went yesterday, and Gaurav, what he has done, or Dr. Sharma, if I'm using the correct terminology, what he has done has completely vindicated and echoed exactly what Labor said he was, by being an utter prick in the House today, being difficult and 100%. Making life difficult for people. So basically what Gaurav Sharma has done today is gone, now if you're going to believe anyone, can I just offer you some evidence to say that Labor's right about me? Basically what he did say. So let's have a look at the House today from One News. Gaurav Sharma being an absolute plonker at a time that's supposed to be ceremonial and welcoming to the new speaker.
It's meant to be a ceremonial welcome to the new speaker. Instead, Gaurav Sharma went off script. Coincidentally, the person he was complaining about was sitting right next to him.
The speaker said, well, if you raise anything about a Labour colleague, any challenges, it would be the end of your career. And then the speaker ended up going to the whip's office.
Trevor Mallard had nil interest in commenting on the allegations. What did you make of Dr. Sharma's actions? One News understands Gaurav Sharma made the complaint 2 weeks ago against several Labour MPs, characterised as disagreements rather than bullying. And Trevor Mallard told Labour. That evening, the Hamilton West MP went...
Do you know what that footage is of him walking around in a circle? Do you understand what that footage was, Chewy?
What's that?
That was him waiting outside the caucus yesterday, not being allowed to come in until it was his time to come in and defend himself, because he'd been ejected from the caucus. So caucus wasn't open to him until it was his time to speak. So he was standing outside like a kid outside a principal's office, walking around in circles with the media filming him.
That is rough.
Public.
I just want to say, Mr. Speaker, I hope...
I stand, you sit. Sorry.
I stand, you sit.
Adrian Rurafi's new speaker's throne wasn't even warm yet.
So you're not finished?
I'm not finished.
Yeah, we'll sit down then.
Politically, these outbursts play into Labour's hands because it makes Gaurav Sharma seem
like
unreasonable. It is a big distraction, though, and MPs are choosing their words very carefully.
The election of a new speaker is a moment for, some humility and grace. And I think what we saw in the debate was that some people can do that and some people can't.
Was that appropriate?
I don't think so.
As an independent MP, Gaurav Sharma won't get many speaking slots. He used this one, including the legal protection of the debating chamber. Jessica Mackay, One News.
So not too much more to add other than that. I don't know if there's been an announcement today. I mean, if anyone in the chat's seen it, you can tell us. I mean, this is sort of a collective conversation we have. And whilst I might be sitting here with Chewy or with George or with someone else, what I'm about to say, I don't have the answer to. So if you've seen it, tell us. Drop a link in there. I haven't seen that he's been ejected from the Labour Party yet. Maybe he has. Maybe I missed that headline. I would have thought.
I think I did see something about him being an independent now.
Well, I
which is
haven't
why
seen
sitting up behind.
that, so I don't know whether Jess Much was actually talking about when he becomes independent or if he is independent now. But either way, as an independent, you obviously have, you can't have equal footing when it comes to speaking in the House as compared to the bigger parties. And so today he's just gone, hey, by the way, I am sort of the dick that everyone says I am, and I'm going to make sure you all know about it. So
because his seat there is up behind ACT, so he's away from the party.
And let me just say, to protect myself from being sued, those words I just used were my honest held belief. And I think that it's probably a positive day for Labor again today, being able to distance himself from him, who has been told to sit down and put him in his place. Okay, David says he was ejected. All right, fair enough. I didn't see that, but that's what I'm saying. You guys can add into these conversations. It doesn't have to be about two people. It can be you as well.
But how bad was that for Mallard to sit, not obviously right next to him, but definitely within throwing range of a water bottle or a binder or just something? I just want, what's that parliament that keeps on having fist fights? Is it Singapore or Malaysia or something like that? Just one. I just want one.
I now want to do, like, remember, I think MTV used to do those those plasticine death fights, where they have like two celebrities fighting against each other. I'm wondering if you did one of those with New Zealand government, who would end up standing atop the pile with the dismembered bodies beneath them in plasticine only.
Oh, I know
who that would be.
It'd be Winston.
He's not there though. But
he'd find a way. Because it'd be like a Royal Rumble sort of thing. It'd be down to the last three men, and then, oh no, we thought he was dead, but it's Winston back again.
Back from the dead. All right. So just wanted to give you a bit of an update on that, only because we've been talking about that for, gosh, maybe a week. Isn't it been interesting? We talked about Uffindale for 4 or 5 days. Now we've talked about Gaurav Sharma for 4 or 5 days. I wonder who's going to be the bully du jour come next week. I wonder if there'll be another name out there.
Yeah, I'd also seen chatter on Twitter about Sharma being seen with some heavy hitters from National, having lunch in a Wellington cafe somewhere.
Right.
So I think that's interesting. There might be more to that down the line.
But what would that do? I mean, to be honest, if National started courting him, I think, look, we were quite careful at the start of this to go, this is what he's saying, this is what they're saying, this is what, But I think upon the weight of evidence that I'm looking at now, that, everyone's saying something about Gaurav Sharma, and he is saying the opposite. In the House today, when he kind of echoed and demonstrated, at least to me, what everyone else was saying, that there'd be some baggage, man. I mean, if another party wanted to work with him, if I was on the executive of another party, I would be like, dudes and dudettes, I actually think what they're talking about in this office is probably correct. Yeah.
Why would you want to bring that?
Yeah.
There's no way.
Rose just talked about Trevor Mallard as well. I got to say one thing about, he's the I was going to say governor because I'm stuck in American politics, the ambassador for Ireland. Personally, greatest job in the world.
Yeah.
If I could pick a job and go, that's a job I want, that's it. Irish ambassador in Ireland. Oh my God. Dream come true. Living in Ireland, getting paid to basically be New Zealand's representative in Ireland. Anytime the All Blacks come, you're obviously front and center. It would be the single best job in the whole wide world. And I'm a little bit jealous, as you may hear. All right. Let us have a look at our first story. Well, it's not our first story, but our next story, which we're talking a bit about BFD. Now, to be honest, I don't know too much about the BFD. It looks like some people in the chat do. But it's a blog site, I think, run primarily by Cameron Slater of Whale Oil fame. But they do have a lot of guest posts. This is a guest post by someone called Mark Freeman. I don't know who Mark Freeman is. But they're always very careful. I'll just scroll to the bottom for a guest post to write something like, guest post content does not necessarily reflect the views of the site or its editor. Guest post content is offered for discussion and alternative points of view. So they're pretty clear.
Slater's learned a lesson.
Yeah, distance themselves from it. So this is a conversation really based on our, as you can see, embedded there in the middle, our podcast with Paula Penfold, but also the documentary Fire and Fury. And the writer of this has some questions to ask. And I'll read you a few bits from the post, and then we will actually answer the questions for the writer so they know. So they've asked questions and they will get answers. And then I'm assuming this will go away and they'll be satisfied and they'll never think of it again, will they, Chewy? Is that how it works?
No,
No,
yeah,
okay.
it's definitely.
So
Teflon.
it talks a little about Stuff Circuit and the online hit piece, of course. As we all know, for these people, hit piece means a piece that either doesn't paint us in a good light or that we disagree with. That's what a hit piece is in these words. Writes this: Paula Penfold and her team spent months following several spokespeople that she referred to as inciters, which she did talk about in our conversation, in the freedom movement online to find out, quote, who's driving a violent, misinformed New Zealand and why. Goes on to quote a couple of bits straight out of our interview, our conversation, where she was talking about using the hostile environment training. This is what Paula said in our conversation. We used that to a degree in places like Afghanistan, but we used it full on in Wellington. And what makes me really sad, not just as a journalist, but also as a citizen, that our hostile environment training is most useful in our own country. What the hell? What's gone wrong? One of the pillars of our democracy is under threat when people won't let us report. I've reported on I don't know how many protests in 30 years as a journalist, and I've never been treated like that in this country or anywhere else. Another conversation around this talks about the New Zealand on-air funded documentary, shows footage of two Stuff journalists being confronted by irate protesters at this year's occupation of Parliament grounds. In an interview with BHN, actually says the BHN, like we got the wrong name for us on RNZ on Sunday now, and it's not the BHN, we're just BHN. Penfold seemed bemused by the anger expressed towards mainstream journalists. At the Parliament protest, she used the hostile environment training, such as situation awareness, that she had previously undergone to prepare for dangerous situations overseas. Read out that comment. The only reason Penfold gives for the hostility is that New Zealand protests have been influenced by the local inciters and overseas actors such as Donald Trump and QAnon. In big, massive letters, if you're listening to this, she avoids any mention of the underlying cause of the protesters' anger. And this is the question that the writer is asking, that Penfold fails to ask why. Why? This has to be seen in the context of the imposition of unprecedented restrictions and the extraordinary stripping of citizens' rights in the last year or two, signaling a radical shift in the relationship between the government and its citizens. The February convoy and protests at Parliament was a visceral response. I guess it should be were, because it's two things, but anyway, to the government's denial of access to jobs. I should be careful doing corrections because I'm dyslexic and I'm probably wrong. Income and services to many citizens who were exercising what was hitherto a fundamental right to body autonomy. Finishes up by saying Penfold is obviously blind to the fact that Stuff and other government-funded mainstream media were complicit in this denial of human rights by largely ignoring the voices of the unvaccinated, as well as, remember as well, during the protest, the largest broadcaster with the most viewership was Chantal Baker. There was days during that protest that the non-mainstream media groups were getting more views than all of the mainstream media combined. That's important to remember when we're talking about not hearing the voices of the unvaccinated, as well as brushing nearly every fact and opinion that was counter to the official COVID narrative under the carpet. That's where the anti-media agenda anger comes from. Now, this is one of the things I wanted to point out. I'm pleased that the writer of this article talks about the anger, because now what they're saying, because I guess they can't deny it because we can see it, is there is anger. And that even though this person hasn't used the word violence, we can see that there was violence. So the narrative has pivoted slightly away from peaceful village, love, peace, mung beans, baby, to yes, there was anger. And my addendum would be, yes, there was violence, but there was a reason for it. Now, I think at least now we're getting to a point of having a fair conversation, because first you acknowledge that there was violence and there is anger. And as Chantal Baker herself said, the journalists were not safe in the village. That's from Chantal. She was going to take the the journalists into the village to keep them safe. We've played that clip already, right? So now that we all agree that there was anger, that we saw violence, and that the village wasn't a safe. You expect me to do like that, aren't you? That's the third one. That wasn't a safe place for journalists to be. Now we can start the conversation from an honest position of why was there anger and why was there violence and why do you think it's justifiable to do that? Article finishes by saying it must be difficult for Penfold to accept that the mainstream media's one-sided and discriminatory coverage has further eroded the New Zealand's public trust in them. It's clear that the mainstream journalistic pillar of democracy in this country is crumbling. To me, it's a little bit like, how Donald Trump or a right-wing commentator in America will be constantly telling everybody that the election's been stolen. And then they'll go, well, look, it's obvious. All the facts are out there. People think the election's been stolen. Now, do they think the election's been stolen? Does the public think that the pillar of democracy is crumbling? Or is it that there is a sector of people who have been convinced by the people who are now saying that it has, and they're now responding to that? I think that's an unanswerable question tonight, but it doesn't mean just because an article says it, that means this is what's happening. It might be just that that's what people are repeating from the front. Like I think the election's been stolen example is a perfectly good one. Chewie, do you want to jump in on that before we answer the question?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is, there would be more to discuss about the Wellington protest if they were honest from the start. Whenever they were saying that there was no violence, we were peaceful. One of the first things that got written on the forecourt when they turned up was hang 'em high.
Hang 'em high.
It's a threat of violence.
Yeah.
They were talking about Nuremberg 2.0, which is just a dog whistle for people should be executed. There was always threats of violence. Now, if there was an argument there that says, oh, well, there are threats of violence because people are really angry. Cool. That's a real thing. I can understand why people were angry. I can't understand a complete disconnect from reality. Now, you might get into that. People might be angry because they're disconnected from reality. But, I'm sick of these people just substituting a reality. We'll criticize the media. We do often. But we don't say that journalism is dead. We go, this commentator's got it wrong. Why aren't these guys asking these questions? That's part of it. That's part of the journalism machine.
Yeah.
And if these guys are going to say, don't listen to the mainstream media, just listen to us, that's really worrying.
Yeah. And look, the other thing is, let's stop this bullshit Pollyanna that you're hearing people talk about it from that side, going, I don't believe in violence. Violence is never the answer. For a start, that's horseshit. Because sometimes, I don't want to burst your little precious little Pollyanna bubble here, but sometimes violence is the answer. If you were walking down the street and you got attacked by someone and you had a big burly partner, a boyfriend or whatever, are you going to want them to go, no, while I'm getting beaten up, you stand aside. Violence is never the answer. No, you're going to want your boyfriend to pile in and help you out. And for whatever reason, there are sometimes appropriate times where that is a response. You think of the worst example you can, a mother committing infanticide, right? Or a father, not picking on mothers, a parent, an adult committing infanticide. If you could get into that moment and knock that motherfucker out to save the kids, would you do it? Of course you would. It would be the appropriate thing to do. So I don't buy all this violence is never the answer. The question is now, in this instance, was violence the answer? And I would suggest no, right? For lots of reasons. They obviously would suggest yes. That's the actual conversation that needs to be had.
And Chantal is focusing on the Fire and the Fury, the footage that's in there. There are hundreds of hours of live stream footage from both journalists and people at the village that illustrate the point that journalists walking through the site, as is their right, it's a public space, were threatened, were asked to leave. There was a reporter from Stuff who walked through every morning, every evening, and he'd live stream the whole thing. And people
on TikTok, watch those.
Yeah, people would get in his face, tell him he's not welcome, tell him that he needs to leave before someone else knows that he's there. It's a threat.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, to answer the question, all right, let's just be really blunt here and answer this this guest writer's question. Why did Penfold not ask why? I guess in theory I can't really answer the question because you've got to ask Paula Penfold that, but I'll tell you why I think she didn't answer that question. Because that's not what her documentary was about.
Yeah, it wasn't in the scope.
It wasn't what the documentary was about. She wasn't looking for the answer to why were these people violent. Well, I guess I should be careful because she did talk about the inciters to people who led them to a place, and when journalists and stuff get dehumanized, then they can be stepped on. So maybe she did. So maybe that's not fair. But I guess what I would say from watching the documentary is I don't think the question was being asked, why are the people on the ground being violent? Right? I think the question of the documentary was, why are the people at the top, the inciters, the people who are in charge of Counterspin Media and Voices of Victory, and why were those guys, causing those down the bottom to be violent? So maybe I should be careful and take a step backwards because it's not my documentary to defend. But I don't think that's what the documentary was about. Now, let me also say there's the stuff going around the internet at the moment about, Paula Penfold did this documentary for, I think it was called 3D, where they talked about the HPV vaccine and how it was harming people. And what a hypocrite Paula Penfold is, because this time she said that vaccines were bad. Why didn't she say they were bad this time? And I'm like, actually, do you guys not understand that actually shows that she's not an ideologue or biased? That shows that she's gone, investigation here, result bad, investigation here, result not bad. So actually, the answer to that question, which some are asking at the moment, I think that actually proves more balance and fairness, not less. Less fairness and less balance would be to have the same answer every time, no matter what. Actually saying, in this instance, there's a case to be answered, and in this instance, there's not. That's actually appropriate based on the results. So if you see people putting that out there, and putting it out there as haha, gotcha, because that's what it kind of feels like. They go, oh, we've got her because she said this was not so good and this is okay. Yeah, that's what journalists do. They investigate, they look at the facts and figures, they come to a conclusion. In this situation, the conclusion was concerns. In this conclusion, they weren't. That's actually showing balance.
It's funny you should bring that up. I don't know if you saw it. It's gone now, and I didn't do anything to it, but someone put that argument up in our YouTube comments.
Oh, I didn't see it.
But it was about 300 to 400 words.
Oh, okay.
It's this massive chapter book that's basically gone there, and she's addressed us, BHN, as if we're Paula.
Okay.
It's very strange. There's a newer version that's a lot more concise now, but it's one of those things of like, oh, I got a notification about the YouTube comments. Oh, holy shit. Okay.
I don't have a spare 2 hours to get through this at the moment. I'll give you an example, and it's not that I'm not a journalist, first of all, but I have worked in news and talk radio for a very long time. And I remember there was, so for example, the teachers' unions, when national standards came in, I supported the teachers' unions and their calls for not wanting national standards. They had very good reasons. I wrote a piece about it. The teachers' union liked it so much that they actually put it on the front of their own website. So my piece, which was a blog on my website, got shared on the actual teachers' union website. Within a couple of years, the Ports of Auckland union, they were doing, there was strike action going on there. And I could see that personally, I didn't agree with what they were doing and why they were doing it. And I stated publicly why. Because in the instance of the teachers' union, through the investigation and the reading I did, I wanted to support them and say, yes, that's an appropriate thing. So in that instance, I got labeled, a mouthpiece of then Helen Clark, a lefty lunatic, all this kind of stuff. And then when Ports of Auckland had their protests, and actually, I actually did some work. I didn't do some work with Cameron Slater like he was a part of my group, but I was working on a radio station where he was a commentator on. So I actually know Cameron a little bit from doing that. And in that instance, I didn't agree with what the union at the ports, and in that instance, obviously, I was a right-wing lunatic, and a voice piece of I guess the National Party and whatever else. But that's because what you do when you're trying to be fair, and as we constantly say, is walk and chew gum at the same time, is you weigh up the situation in front of you and you come to a conclusion. And sometimes in different situations, unless you're an ideologue, you come to different conclusions. because they're different situations. And that was the time, and I've talked about this before, I wrote the piece that calls that's called something like intelligent debate versus ideology. See, if you're having an intelligent debate, you acknowledge that no one would say they're right 100% of the time, right? An ideologue thinks they're right 100% of the time. If you're having an intelligent debate, you're going to know that it's impossible to be right 100% of the time. So maybe this instance, whatever the debate you're having is, maybe this is the one you're wrong in. Maybe it's worth just remembering that, because no one's right 100% of the time. That means by definition, sometimes you're wrong. So if someone always sits on exactly the same side of the political spectrum, let's say always supporting unions, sometimes they're going to be wrong. If someone's always supporting Big Pharma, sometimes they're going to be wrong. If someone's always against Big Pharma, sometimes they're going to be wrong. If someone sometimes supports, I guess, what's going on within, the vaccine world and sometimes doesn't, that speaks to balance. I rest my case.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, my case with that is I went through an intense 6 months of absolutely hating everything that Tova O'Brien said, and now it's swung the other way. It just depends on the topic.
Yeah. Anything to throw out there from the chat, or should we get into our conversation around quiet quitting and still to come? The best video if you're a parent. It's not even just about a parent, actually. If you're someone who uses technology, it's one of the best videos you're going to see tonight. Trust me. I am kind of building it up. I'm not, and actually I didn't intend to leave it towards the end, but it's already 10:37, so it's going to come. I'm just hoping.
I don't know what this is, but I'm just hoping that it is just security camera footage of a kid with an iPad falling down some stairs.
No, it's baby sloths in a bucket. That's what it is.
Oh, fuck them in. Let's get on to quiet quitting, because
because actually the bit that
you might have to deal with some outbursts from me.
The thing that I want to talk about to do with parenting and technology, it kind of has to go at the end of the quiet quitting, because there's a connection. So let's just go straight into this. If you haven't heard of it yet, what is quiet quitting? This was on CNN in the last 24 hours, and they talked a little bit about actually what it was.
And then there's a rising get paid to don't work movement, getting millions of hits on TikTok and Instagram, calling itself quiet quitting. The idea being keep the job, but don't work very hard at it and focus on getting fulfillment outside of work. A story about quiet quitting has been the #1 most.
Speak up.
Radical.
Yes,
that's a radical thought.
I know, like work what you're expected to work, the hours you're expected to work. Off the chain, isn't it?
Read story all week long at the Wall Street Journal's website. The Journal also recently reported that some are exploiting remote work to hold multiple jobs, getting paid to be mediocre at 2 jobs instead of being good at 1. Axios has labeled all of this the new anti-work movement, a rebellion against rise and grind. A recent Gallup survey found that employee engagement in the United States is falling across all generations, but especially among younger Americans. Among those born after 1989, 54% call themselves not engaged, meaning they'll show up to do the minimum required, but not much else.
Cool. So there's part 1. So that's what quiet quitting is. Basically doing the job you're paid for and nothing else. And look, we've all been in those jobs where your boss is like, give it 1,000%. We got to give it 1,000%. I remember being in a job working in radio. I was working in Tauranga, actually. And I had the audacity of a program director I had there who there was 2 things. First of all, he used David Letterman as an example of how to prepare for a show. So what I said to him was, hey, you give me 22 writers like David Letterman's got, and I will prepare for the show exactly as David Letterman did. I was a bit of a young upstart, and that didn't go down so well, but I'm like, what are you talking about? David Letterman, who's got millions and millions and millions of dollars of resource behind him, me who's working for a local Tauranga radio station, sort of straight out of doing overnights on More FM into my first sort of day job, and you want me to put out a product equal to someone with 22 writers and tens of millions of dollars of resource? This is the same boss who got us all together it wasn't a toxic culture, but there was some stuff going on there. Got us all together, all the announcers together and staff together in a room. It was like, when you come to work, and when you get into that elevator, leave your troubles at the door. Leave them all behind you. To which I, as a young upstart, maybe shouldn't have spoken this publicly, put my hand up and said, What do you do when those troubles come on you when you get into the elevator? You know, like when you're outside the elevator, you don't have them, but when you get into the elevator, those you get those troubles. What do you do then? Yeah, I only spent 14 months in that job.
Funny that, you know, certainly I came up through broadcasting as well, and I'm sure this will sound very familiar to you, Pat. You know, you got to pay your dues. You just got to do anything to get your foot in the door. You know, I was doing late night shows and copywriting and outside broadcasts and all of that sort of stuff. And when an opportunity came up to be a breakfast radio host in Balclutha, someone said that was the opportunity. You pay your dues in the regions, then you can come back and have a show on a big boy station. Now, my understanding of breakfast radio at that stage was vastly different from the job that they sent me down to. I was working from 5:30 through until 3 in the afternoon as a solo breakfast host with no automation. I also had to write ads as well, and it didn't go very, very well, and I blew out of that industry. But I think what's coming, there's this real flip, and it's very obvious in the States at the moment. You know, they have run down their unions. They've, you know, since Reagan's time, they just smashed the hell out of the unions. Workers don't have any rights, and they never felt like they had any rights. They had to have a job because there was no other safety net for them. You just took what you could get, and you do everything to keep that job. And now because of COVID and their whole situation over there, it's flipped. If your job, if you work in a state that has an at-will law for working, you know, you could be hired or fired at will, why the fuck would you give them 2 weeks notice that you found a better job? And so people are going, yeah, I'm not coming in tomorrow. I've got a job that pays twice as much doing the same thing for a competitor. And people go, oh, this isn't very professional. You know, it's that sort of thing. It's people realizing that they have worth, that they don't have to work 50, 55, 60 hours a week because there's a promotion being dangled in front of them. They know it's not coming.
Yeah.
They don't know that someone else that's coming in the door after them is going to get paid more. So really, why would you expect top rate work out of something? Not to take away from anybody that wants to tilt at that windmill, but I have certainly worked jobs. You know, I worked another job where I was pulling in 60-hour weeks in the hope of a promotion for a year and a half. And it never came. It would always, it'd be in the budget for next year. It'd be in the budget next year. Fuck them. I'm either good for the job or I'm not.
Yeah, no, and look, I think that's absolutely. I've got boatloads of stories about what radio. I worked for a radio station once, and in my contract, they basically said they wanted me to be available. They insisted that I'd be available for every public holiday to work, and I said no. And they were like, and actually, the top management, the CEO said it doesn't say that in the contract, and I showed them because my manager had written it in that they wanted us there every single public holiday, and I said no. And the reason those public holidays are there is so people can get a break. That's the whole idea. And so they didn't do it. But I guess I was a bit of an upshot in those sorts of things, but it went both ways as well. I also remember sitting in a meeting with a much more junior. I did a breakfast show in an Auckland radio station, and I was sitting in there with a much more junior announcer than me, and they were going to pay me more than they paid her. And I actually said, no, if we're going to do the same job, we should get paid the same amount. I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, yes, I'm more senior. I've had more experience, but if that person's going to turn up at 5 o'clock and they're going to stay through, then they should be getting paid the same as me. They're doing the same work and they should get the same pay. So it goes kind of both ways. I think you can't have one without the other. And if you're going to stand there and go, I won't do this, then you shouldn't expect anyone else to then do it either. And if you have an opportunity at some stage to enforce that, then you should. So, you know, I mean, in those days, it wasn't a lot. Maybe I went from 39,000 to 36,000 and they went from 33,000 to 36,000 or something. So it wasn't like I was giving away hundreds of thousands of dollars or anything. But I think that's what you kind of do. Yeah. And I don't like, so this is the answer. Let's play the second clip, because now they've got someone who is kind of an influencer or a TikToker who is talking about educating people as to what quiet quitting is. And so let's actually have a listen to her and what she talks about when it comes to what is quiet quitting, because basically it seems that there's two sides of this. The bosses are saying, hang on, you should be privileged to work for me and you should work as much as you can to do, to get your pay. Whereas the workers are now saying, hang on, I'll work what I've been asked and expected to work, but if you want me to work more, then I expect to get more. And I always say to people, if you're working for minimum wage and you don't love your job, then your bosses are going to go through staff over and over and over and over again.
100%.
Because the most important thing for minimum wage or for a low wage is that people feel valued and people want to be there because of the environment around them. So it doesn't always necessarily have to be if you work 110%, you're going to get paid 110%. There can be a culture of a workplace as well that just makes you want to be able to give to it. And you know that because they don't take advantage of you. But let's have a listen to the guest that they've got on, explaining a bit more about her experience of quiet quitting. And she's someone who tells others about it.
Yeah, so I initially left because I wasn't finding fulfillment from my 9-to-5 job. And I saw that there was so much opportunity outside of the basic 9-to-5 corporate world that I really wanted to get into.
But were you mailing it in while someone was paying you? And if so, do you feel guilty about that?
No, so while I was in my 9-to-5 job, I still was working my 40 hours a week. I was still fulfilling my job duties. I was just taking away that feeling of stress I had after work by feeling like I needed to put in 1,000%, needed to join trainings and do as much as I possibly could to go up the corporate ladder. That just wasn't my end goal.
There you go. And the last clip I'm going to play from these two guys is the announcer basically uses an old-fashioned term, loafing. Are you loafing? In other words, are you taking advantage of your workplace? And this is the thing about the employers so often are saying, don't take advantage of us. And the employees are now starting to say, well, actually, I'm going to do exactly what you've asked me. But what I won't do is anything more than that. So I think that's actually contractually a fair arrangement. You pay me to do a job, I'll do the job. Whereas in days gone by, and maybe in some places now, people are talking about Amazon, for example. They're like, we pay you, and because we pay you, we own you, and you better work above and beyond, which is completely inappropriate and unfair. So the announcer here has just talked about, are you guys loafing, doing this, quiet quitting?
I think that there's two groups in that case, and I think they're not trying to loaf. Everyone is trying to do the work that's required of them. I think they're just trying to figure out what that fulfillment looks like outside of work, as well as they're not at the point where they're realizing that their burnout might not even be because they're overworked. It might be because they're misaligned in the job that they're in. And I think a lot of people will realize that. When I was quiet quitting, it was not for a very long time. I only did it for 3 months, although my plan was to do it for 9. But over time, I started realizing that I couldn't stick it out any longer because it wasn't just that I was overworked and burnt out and, all the mental health struggles I was dealing with. It was actually because the job I was in was just not the right one for me. And I think many are going to realize that as well.
There you go. So there's the commentary from her on quiet quitting, what it is. And I mean, maybe it seems like, millennials like to label everything. So maybe what they're doing is they're self-identifying as a quiet quitter, but what they're just doing is their contractual work. And that's a new label for something that's been around for some people for a very long time. But I also think this is also a wake-up call for bosses and for companies. It's like, actually, if you want more of your staff than you're prepared to pay, there better be some other ways that you reward them and make that an okay arrangement between the two parties. You can't this day and age just go, well, we're paying you, do what you're fucking told. You're like, well, no, we're paying you to do a specific role that you've employed me for, and that's it.
I mean, this is crazy, but happy workers generally do more work. Like that. Yeah. And they can be happy by the work culture. They can be happy because their workmates and their bosses are awesome, or they can be happy because they get fairly compensated. But I mean, let's dial down to the fucking nuts of it. Let's talk about minimum wage. What was the whole idea of minimum wage? Was a minimum amount for someone to keep and run a household.
Yeah.
Back in the day, it was only one person working. Now it's shifted to, this is the minimum that I legally have to pay you.
Yeah.
Which, let's translate that. If the rules were different, I'd pay you less because I could.
Yeah.
Now, if that's you, like, how should you come in on weekends? Should you fill that extra shift? Should you cancel plans because somebody else has not organized a proper roster? No.
Yeah.
No. I mean, a lot of these people, Like, talk about the people that work for Amazon or for work at big multinational corporations, billion-dollar corporations. They don't care about you. You've got an employee number, you draw a wage, you come in, you do your job. Don't kill yourself. You know, if you want to run your own business, if you want to build something yourself, run yourself into the ground. It's your passion. But yeah, calling this, you know, quiet quitting, I think, you know, in the comments we had a mention from David saying that in the old days it used to be called work to rule. And I think it's just, you know, you don't even have to give it a title.
Yeah.
Do the job that you have been hired to do and put in the appropriate amount of effort for what you're paid.
So where I want to go with this now is to talk about a conversation that was had 6 years ago, right? And some people will know about this conversation. It's with a guy called Simon Sinek. And he did a very interesting online conversation. He's a bit of a self-help kind of guy. He's an author, and he works with companies on how to create a better workspace. Yeah. And this is his company now that he's running, or organization he's running. It's called the Optimism Company, the Spark of Optimism. There is an entire section in the bookshop called Self-Help, but there is no section called Help Others. We are helping to build the Help Others industry. It starts with optimism. He had a conversation that went pretty viral a wee while ago. Some of you will have seen this. And this is something that I have played to my children several times because it talks about devices and that. And this is why I want to help any parents out there as well. But this quiet quitting thing and this attitude is coming from millennials. When Simon Sinek put this conversation out 6 years ago, there seemed to be a little bit of what are these millennials all about? A millennial today is about 25 to 41 years old. So when this came out, they were kind of 19 to 35, right? And he has a conversation about what millennials are, what they value, who they are, and I want to play it to you because I think it explains a little bit more around what this quiet quitting is. The first part's 3 minutes long. I don't know if we'll cut in or not, but let's just have a listen to him talking about millennials in the workspace, and then I'm going to play another little clip from this, and then I'm going to play the clip that's really going to help you parents as well.
What's the millennial question? Apparently, millennials as a generation, which is a group of people who were born approximately 1984 and after, are tough to manage. And they're accused of being entitled and narcissistic and self-interested, unfocused, lazy. But entitled is the big one. And because they confound leadership so much, what's happening is leaders are asking the millennials, what do you want? And millennials are saying, we want to work in a place with purpose, love that. We want to make an impact, you know, whatever that means. We want free food and beanbags. And so somebody articulates some sort of purpose. There's lots of free food and there's beanbags, and yet for some reason they're still not happy. And that's because they're missing. There's a missing piece. What I've learned is that I can break it down into 4 pieces, right? There are four things, 4 characteristics. One is parenting, the other one is technology, the third is impatience, and the fourth is environment. The generation that we call the millennials, too many of them grew up subject to, not my words, failed parenting strategies, you know, where, for example, they were told that they were special all the time. They were told that they could have anything they want in life just because they want it, right? They were told, some of them got into honors classes, not because they deserved it, but because their parents complained. And some of them got A's, not because they earned them, but because the teachers didn't want to deal with the parents. Some kids got participation medals. You got a medal for coming in last, right? Which the science we know is pretty clear, which is it devalues the medal and the reward for those who actually work hard. And it actually makes the person who comes in last feel embarrassed because they know they didn't deserve it. So it actually makes them feel worse, right? So you take this group of people and they graduate school and they get a job and they're thrust into the real world. And in an instant, they find out they're not special. Their moms can't get them a promotion, that you get nothing for coming in last. And by the way, you can't just have it because you want it, right? And in an instant, their entire self-image is shattered. And so you have an entire generation that's growing up with lower self-esteem than previous generations. The other problem to compound it is we're growing up in a Facebook, Instagram world. In other words, we're good at putting filters on things. We're good at showing people that life is amazing even though I'm depressed, right? And so everybody sounds tough and everybody sounds like they got it all figured out. And the reality is there's very little toughness and most people don't have it figured out. And so when the more senior people say, well, what should we do? They sound like, this is what you got to do. And they have no clue, right?
So there's the first part. Chewy, any thoughts on that first bit?
I want to react to his presentation. I want to not like this guy, but I'm starting to see where he's going to. I think it's definitely a very American view on things, but yeah,
he's British, but anyway. But he's talking in an American setting. Well, let me play you the second bit because this is where he gets to the kind of, obviously you can see below me here, it's 15 minutes long. People can look it up for themselves. Let me play you the second bit, and this is not the bit for parents just yet. Again, that's going to come, and that's a really interesting thing to learn if people don't know. And but this is the bit about job satisfaction, and he's talking about technology, and he's talking about what it's done to millennials, and I would actually say what it's done to all of us. So let's have a listen to this, but it's only a couple of minutes.
You don't have to learn the social coping mechanisms, right? Everything you want, you can have instantaneously. Everything you want, instant gratification, except job satisfaction and strength of relationships. There ain't no app for that. They are slow, meandering, uncomfortable, messy processes. And so I keep meeting these wonderful, fantastic, idealistic, hardworking, smart kids. They've just graduated school. They're in their entry-level job. I sit down with them and I go, how's it going? They go, I think I'm going to quit. I'm like, why? They're like, I'm not making an impact. I'm like, you've been here 8 months. You know? It's as if they're standing at the foot of a mountain and they have this abstract concept called impact that they want to have in the world, which is the summit. What they don't see is the mountain. I don't care if you go up the mountain quickly or slowly, but there's still a mountain. And so what this young generation needs to learn is patience, that some things that really, really matter, like love or job fulfillment, joy, love of life, self-confidence, a skill set, any of these things, all of these things take time. Sometimes you can expedite pieces of it, but the overall journey is arduous and long and difficult. And if you don't ask for help and learn that skill set, you will fall off the mountain, or you will, the worst case scenario, and we're already seeing it. The worst case scenario is we're seeing an increase in suicide rates. We're seeing an increase in this generation. We're seeing an increase in accidental deaths due to drug overdoses. We're seeing more and more kids drop out of school or take leaves of absence due to depression. Unheard of. This is really bad. The best case scenario, those are all bad cases, right? The best case scenario is you'll have an entire population growing up and going through life and just never really finding joy. They'll never really find deep fulfillment in work or in life. They'll just waft through life and it'll be just, it's fine.
So that's the second part I was going to play. So now I think about that and the quiet quitting thing, and I go, in the 6 years, have those, because we're mostly talking about millennials still, sort of 25, so out of college, that's the workforce at the moment. Have they worked it out? Have they figured it out? Or is this quiet quitting, I agree with doing with what you're getting paid for, but this whole thing that Simon talked about there where he goes, no, I'm not feeling fulfilled, I'm going to quit after 8 months. Has that been worked through? Has that gone? Are we now figuring out that work-life balance, or is this still a part of the millennial psyche?
Yeah, I mean, certainly for those of you out there that are on Reddit, I definitely suggest you look at a subreddit called Anti-Work, because I think this really nails what a lot of people are dealing with at the moment, where they've come from all the lessons from their elders, their parents, what you've got to do to make it, you've got to make yourself available, you've got to go the extra mile, all of that sort of stuff. They've done all that and they get no recognition from it, and so they don't get any loyalty. So why should it be given? I definitely click into what this guy is saying about making an impact. Making an impact is your own personal impact. That's up to you to decide what that impact is. I've definitely worked in businesses where, I spent ages trying to become a store manager at a particular business. That was the long-term goal, but that wasn't the first thing that I did to make an impact. I remember going away I hated this thing. I got selected to go away on this management training track thing, and they got to sit us down, and we did some sort of I remember rolling my eyes so hard, coming up with a personal brand. And this definitely isn't my jibe. So I'm sitting there going, oh, okay, tell me about this thing. And as they go through, I'm starting to think about it. It came down to, you could sum yourself up in 4 things. I remember one of those things, and that was momentum. For me, to get satisfaction out of something, I have to feel momentum. And it was a double-edged sword in this job, because the moment that momentum went away and I felt like I was pushing against a wall, I wasn't happy anymore.
Yeah.
But it's just recognizing that, and that's happened again in the job after that. I hit a wall and it was time to move on. So, I mean, it's just, yeah, look, nobody said to me that I was special. Nobody said that, all of these things that he's saying. I'm a little bit outside of his gauge for a millennial.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of those same things would apply. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think in America especially, the low wages, the lack of safety net, the lack of union support, and the ability now, where they've had what, hundreds of thousands of people die out of their workplace, and now people are going, oh, nobody wants to work anymore because they haven't got enough workers.
Mm-hmm.
Then the workers are able to turn around and go, well, there's my job over there for those guys for more. I'll stay here if you give me more money. And they go, well, we can't really justify more money for you. Okay, cool. I'm out. Because you're not giving me loyalty. I'm not giving you loyalty. So,
or at the very least, like, I'll do what I've been contracted to do, but not the above and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I mean, these are people in the workforce that are getting judged by older people from a workforce that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
The goalposts are always moving.
Yeah.
Will there be lessons learned out of this? Fuck, I hope so.
Let me just put up what Kim said as well. Kim says she thinks that he's been pretty unfair to young people. I think they're pretty incredible.
Yes.
The bit we're going to play now. So between those first 2 bits, there was another bit, and the bit, I didn't play them in order because I think this bit is like every parent needs to hear. Every person needs to hear, actually. And a lot of the stuff that Simon Sinek is referencing isn't necessarily his thoughts. It's research, it's information, it's data. That's why he says things like, these aren't my words, right? He's not actively saying this peer-reviewed paper cites X, Y, Z, but that's what it is. It's not necessarily just his opinion. I'm sure there's opinion in there, and there's always opinion when you're delivering a message, but a lot of that has actually come from, data out there, science, research, that sort of thing as well. However, it might bring a bit even better context now that we play this last clip. Chewy, this might be interesting for you to hear as well, because you're someone who works or has worked in the kind of technology world, especially around devices and that kind of stuff. If you are a parent and you're having that conversation with your kids, or it's an upcoming conversation around intermediate school age kids getting phones, or primary school age kids getting phones, or your 15-year-old kid having their phone in their room, this will be one of the best videos you will see this year, purely to give you information. Right? What you do with it is up to you. But this is Simon Sinek. So this is actually a bit between those 2 clips we've just played. Yeah. And he's talking about when you add devices into the world of millennials in the workplace. Now, let's play it. You can have a listen to it. But I've actually shown this clip to my children numerous times when we've been having conversations around why we as parents would not give them a phone or have restrictions on the phone. I've literally sat in a lounge with them and played them this clip. I mean, maybe I'm an ogre, maybe you wouldn't do that, but I just think if nothing else, it's great information. as he talks about the impact on millennials, and I would say on people, of technology.
We know that engagement with social media and our cell phones releases a chemical called dopamine. That's why when you get a text, it feels good, right? So, we've all had it where you're feeling a little bit down or feeling a bit lonely. And so you send out 10 texts to 10 friends, hi, 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 hi. Because it feels good when you get a response, right? Right? It's why we count the likes. It's why we go back 10 times to see if my Instagram is growing slower, did I do something wrong? Do they not like me anymore, right? The trauma for young kids to be unfriended, right? Because we know when you get a hit of dopamine, which feels good. It's why we like it. It's why we keep going back to it. Dopamine is the exact same chemical that makes us feel good when we smoke, when we drink, and when we gamble. In other words, it's highly, highly addictive, right? We have age restrictions on smoking, gambling, and alcohol, and we have no age restrictions on social media and cell phones, which is the equivalent of opening up the liquor cabinet and saying to our teenagers, hey, by the way, this adolescence thing, if it gets you down. But that's basically what's happening. That's basically what's happening, right? That's basically what happened. You have an entire generation that has access to an addictive, numbing chemical called dopamine through social media and cell phones as they're going through the high stress of adolescence. Why is this important? Almost every alcoholic discovered alcohol when they were teenagers. When we're very, very young, the only approval we need is the approval of our parents. And as we go through adolescence, we make this transition where we now need the approval of our peers. Very frustrating for our parents, very important for us. It allows us to acculturate outside of our immediate families into the broader tribe, right? It's a highly, highly stressful and anxious period of our lives, and we're supposed to learn to rely on our friends. Some people, quite by accident, discover alcohol and numbing effects of dopamine to help them cope with the stresses and anxieties of adolescence. Unfortunately, that becomes hardwired in their brains, and for the rest of their lives, when they suffer significant stress, they will not turn to a person, they will turn to the bottle. Social stress, financial stress, career stress, that's pretty much the primary reasons why an alcoholic drinks, right? What's happening is because we're allowing unfettered access to these dopamine-producing devices and media, basically it's becoming hardwired, and what we're seeing is as they grow older, too many kids don't know how to form deep, meaningful relationships. Their words, not mine. They will admit that many of their friendships are superficial. They will admit that their friends, that they don't count on their friends, they don't rely on their friends, they have fun with their friends, but they also know that their friends will cancel on them as something better comes along. Deep, meaningful relationships are not there because they never practice the skill set, and worse, they don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with stress. So when significant stress starts to show up in their lives, they're not turning to a person, they're turning to a device, they're turning to social media, they're turning to these things which offer temporary relief. We know, the science is clear, we know that people who spend more time on Facebook suffer higher rates of depression than people who spend less time on Facebook, right? These things balanced. Alcohol is not bad, too much alcohol is bad. Gambling is fun, too much gambling is dangerous, right? There's nothing wrong with social media and cell phones. It's the imbalance, right? If you're sitting at dinner with...
There you go. So that's the clip.
Thoughts, I don't know, man. I can see, I can agree with some parts of it, but then there's also big sways of it that are just like, here's a slightly older person out of that age group going, the kids these days with their little Instagram, and I don't understand it. Nobody likes my swimsuit picture, and that made me feel sad. So it's destroying a generation. It's a really tough thing. Like, some of the things that he mentioned is 100% true. We know that social media has affected people's self-image and all of that sort of thing. Being an adolescent is now and has always been fucking hard.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a generation that, let's just take it off. They've had a pandemic. They've had a major financial crisis. They've had the housing bubble. The world's literally on fire. You've got a little ticking clock on the world at the moment. You have a major global, major full noise war going on. In fact, a lot of these these millennials have known nothing but a war going on. Like, when has it stopped for these guys?
I appreciate your perspective, but I'm thinking about me growing up. I mean, I used to talk about, this thing. There's not much difference about this thing when it comes to bullying and when it was at school. The difference is this is now in my pocket. When I was at school, you got punched in the nose, and then or you'd get called at home and hung up on at the phone that was attached to the wall. And then you got email and that kind of stuff, and all of a sudden you started getting things coming into a computer that was in the lounge. And then there was message boards and stuff, and you get trolled on there. And then so it's always been there in some version. The difference with this is now like in your pocket and accessible 24/7 for many, many, many people. But what you've just said about what millennials have been through, I would say that every generation's had that on some level.
Yes.
I mean, you could even go pandemic. I was at high school through the late 80s into the early 90s, and the AIDS epidemic was out there. There was literally a Wall Street global financial crisis in 1987. Like actually our Vietnam War only just finished. There was a Cold War. So I mean, I don't want to dismiss how that would impact this generation, but I think every generation's had something to go through. There's something around the millennials that seems different. And I'm not saying that in a negative, derogatory way, like get off my lawn, but I guess what Simon is identifying, and just so you know, the old man, at the time he delivered this, millennials were 19 to 36 and he was 42. So it's not like it's the 60-year-old speaking to a 25-year-old at least.
100%.
But yeah, look, I think I actually wonder how much this, because this was really this is the only difference. Social media, technology, that's really between me sitting in a bus stop in 1989 after cricket practice and a kid sitting in a bus stop today after cricket practice. This is really the only difference. I'd read a book or be bored. Like I've said to my kids numerous times, you kids need to learn how to be bored. Like when I was growing up, I had to learn that at times there was nothing to do. If it was a Sunday and I was trying to catch a bus home from central Auckland to my house because I'd been to the movies, they were only once an hour. If I didn't have a book or something, I was literally just sitting there. I couldn't grab this thing out. Whereas I have conversations with my kids. Now, I had one the other day with my 13-year-old. It was like a 3-minute job we were doing together, right? We were doing a job together. Come and help me do this, kid. And she went, can I get my phone out so I can put something on, some music on? And I went, by the time you go and get the phone, she actually doesn't have a phone. She's got an iPad, like an iPod that she can play music on. By the time she went and got her iPod, brought it back, probably tried to Bluetooth it to the speaker, the job would have been finished 3 times over. But there's a mindset at the moment, perhaps because of this, and I'm not picking on any generation because I do it as well. I don't think my bowels work anymore if I don't have this in my hand, because it's always in my hand when I'm sitting down. Like I'm genuinely scared if I went to the toilet without this, that my bowels wouldn't work. So I'm not blaming them. I'm saying everybody, there's a difference now. And I really do think that this is the cornerstone of the difference compared to any other generation, because every other generation had a health crisis or a pandemic or something to be scared of. Every other generation had conflict around the world. Every other generation had something that's, financially, but this is the difference. So this is the thing that we should be learning about. And I agree with Simon Sinek about dopamine and alcohol. We don't just throw alcohol at our 10-year-olds, but we do with cell phones. So I think that part of this conversation is really important for parents to get a hold of.
This is literally a question that I've had in my work life so many times, and I'm not going to say that I have an answer at all. I'm just saying, because parents of your age, dealing with teenagers at the moment, you didn't have to deal with that, so it's new. You have to learn it as well. You didn't have to deal with technology in schools. That's something they've got. You don't know it. There's no grounding, and there's nobody telling you what to do. There is a whole lot of people like this guy telling you to be absolutely terrified that it's a civilization-ending threat. It is.
I don't know. I don't know if that's what he's saying though. I think what he's saying,
I'm
and I think,
extrapolating out.
yeah, sure.
Heaps, but
I think what he's saying, and I think what I'm saying is actually we need to approach this more sensibly. Like, there's a comment in the chat now that someone could see my father holding up a VHS tape and complaining the same about you. No, that's nothing like the same, because the VHS tape was sitting in the lounge in my house, you know, in the one TV with the 3 channels that my father actually had control of at 6 o'clock every night because he wanted to watch the news. That's incredibly different from this thing here, which is more powerful than the original rockets were that went to the moon, sitting in someone's pocket, being able to get access to everything, anytime, anywhere, 24 hours, 365. So I don't think it's the same as holding up a VHS tape when I wasn't out the back playing cricket or in town watching a movie. It's different. It is actually different. So, and I think what my thing is what I get from him, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I've got the Pollyanna glass on at the moment, is him saying we have to acknowledge what these things are and then figure out how to do it. And I guess going right back to the question I'm going now with this quiet quitting, are the millennials who these conversations were having 6 years ago around these things, are they now finding their space by not kind of just chucking things in, but actually doing it sensibly and quiet quitting, which is where we started, to then find their path to what is going to fulfill them, which I think ultimately is what we all want. We all want to do something that fulfills us, eh?
If there's one thing that you can say about humanity is that we're adaptable. Now, we either adapt the environment to us or we adapt to whatever we've created. I read something the other day that like, as far as technology, really sat with me really well. If it existed or was invented between your birth and the age of 15,
okay,
that's the way things have always been. No worries. Everything between, say, 15 and, let's say, your early 30s.
Yep.
That's new and exciting. I'm interested in it. I can probably make some money out of it. Everything that happens after your, say, mid-30s, everything that's invented after that is scary and we shouldn't trust it. And I say that as someone working in tech. As soon as I read that, I went, VR, never take off, don't trust it. No point.
I do wonder though, you know, these kinds of conversations, I don't think they'll ever fit well with someone like you and me, because I am a technology adopter. I think you probably are too, but to the general public, that may be the case.
Yeah,
that may be the case.
My experience is talking to a lot of parents about their kids' first cell phones. Mm-hmm. How do I mitigate risk? How do I approach this? I never had to deal with this. Same thing with buying a laptop for their kid for school. I see parents go, we're just going to buy them a MacBook and it's going to last them until university. And it's like, no, buy them a garbage $300 laptop for 12, 13, 14, 15. Yeah, halfway through high school, you're going to have to replace that. And then university, they're going to have to buy their own. And then they become a doctor. And that's how it works. But they're going to have a Facebook. They're going to have an Instagram. You need to have these conversations. You need to be involved in this because this is part of their life. You can't just go, it's their own private world and I'm not going to insert myself into it. It's the same. Like you,
but that's what parenting is. I mean, that's what parenting is. You do insert yourself. And I guess what you go, sorry.
I think a lot of parents, they think about their own parents and go, oh, I'm not going to do what my mum and dad were. They were incredibly invasive of my privacy. I'm going to trust my kid to do the right thing. You can't always trust a teenager to do the right thing because we've all been teenagers and we all know how stupid teenagers are. You talk about, getting used to being bored. I didn't do that. I would set fire to things. So
bus stops.
Now it's exciting. It's the exciting bus stop. It's just people need to adapt. Parents need to be engaged, but not fearful, or maybe no, that's not an appropriate level of fear, wariness.
So let me give this one encouragement, and this is coming from a father who maybe is trying to be a bit more engaged with technology. Obviously what we do is very technologically advanced and stuff. And so I get to see and read and hear about a lot of the stuff going on. Here's my one encouragement, because I said this would be about parents at some stage as well. Don't just, and maybe this is what you're saying as well, Chewy, don't just get the phone and go to your 11-year-old, okay, you've got a phone now.
Yeah.
There are products out there. I mean, I talked about Apple Family the other day. I use Apple Family a bit now. I used to use a product called Our Pact, where you can actually turn your smartphone into a dumb phone. An 8-year-old doesn't need a smartphone, But if you think your 8-year-old desperately needs a phone, you can actually buy dumb phones. Places like the Warehouse actually sell them, or you can turn a smartphone into a dumb phone with software like Our Pact. So you do still have the right to be a parent and say, my child's at this level. I don't give a fuck what all the other kids and their parents are doing with their kids. My child's at this level. This is the appropriate level of response or technology they should have. So my encouragement, I guess, tonight after this whole conversation, when I was going to specifically talk about parenting, is you are still allowed to parent your child as they're growing up, no matter what all the other parents are doing. You are still allowed to make suggestions that work for you and your family, and there is technology out there to help you with technology. Should, for example, you not want your 13-year-old to be on a cell phone at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Be engaged. Be engaged.
Yep. You know, I can just make these statements up on my childless mountain. I saw a lot of discussion lately. Somebody on the internet said something about childless people in their 40s, which made me laugh so loud today. Just that we would regret it because my life is empty without children, and that is, of course, why children exist, to fill a void in my life, not for them being autonomous people on their own.
I think that every aspect of life has its pros and every aspect of life has its cons. I mean, having children, there's lots of pros to that. There are certainly some cons to it. Not having children, there are some cons to it, but there are certainly lots of pros to it as well. It's like I know both people and both. I know people who I do know people who actually look back and go, maybe we shouldn't have had kids. I know people who literally think that, and I know people who chose not to have kids who wish they did. And I know the other way, people who don't have kids who are absolutely stoked that it's the best decision they've ever made. And I know people who have had kids that it's the best decision they've ever made. There's no right, there's no wrong. No. There's whatever works for people. There's pros and cons for every situation. And have at it. All right. Is there anything else you want to wrap up with, sir, before we head off?
There was just one little thing. It is completely off tangent from everything else that we've been talking about, but New Zealand's Defence Forces put this out today, as I find it so I can scroll down it. Oh God. From the looks of it, a New Zealand Defence Force soldier took some leave and went over to Ukraine and has been killed over there. So there, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any talk about how many New Zealand Defence Force personnel may be over there fighting for Ukraine. We've got some over in, I think, Poland and in the UK in an official capacity, but this is the first one that I know of that had gone off to fight for Ukraine.
So we're suggesting that they're doing, they've gone and joined the maybe a Ukrainian expat or family or something like that, going back to protect homeland. Is that what the suggestion is?
Well, no, they haven't mentioned anything about their background or that sort of thing. Just that that a soldier was on leave, has been killed in Ukraine, so he could have been doing humanitarian work. He could have joined the International Legion that they've got over there. They haven't said whether it's in combat, but it is an active war zone. So, yeah, somebody decided to go over and do some good in Ukraine, and that is what happens sometimes.
All right. I guess we'll follow that up as more news breaks about that. But that's us for tonight. Thank you for joining us, guys. We appreciate you being involved. We'll be back tomorrow night for another edition of Big Hairy News. Remember, you can always get us through Twitter, through Facebook, or even through YouTube. You can put comments in there and we can see them as well. Just don't make them apparently massively too long, like Chewy was talking about today, because, you know, I'm dyslexic and Chewy is too busy. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow night for another edition. Until then, be safe and we'll see you then. Hooroo.